I remember the first time I ever went deep into the woods, alone. The kind of forest where sunlight barely touches the ground, and even the birds seem to move quietly, like they don't want to be noticed. The fog drifts low, curling around the roots of the pines, and the silence hums against your ears, thick and heavy. My cabin sat at the far edge of the clearing, small and weathered, the kind that groans in the wind as if it has secrets it's desperate to keep. That night, the lights flickered, first dim, then bright, then gone, and the air smelled faintly metallic, like rain on iron. I thought it was just the storm coming. But then the shadows moved differently, too deliberate, too aware. I could feel the weight of eyes on me, watching from somewhere beyond the tree line. Every breath I took felt loud, every step an announcement, and then I heard it, a low hum vibrating through the floorboards outside my window. That's when I saw it. The road disappeared beneath a curtain of fog. Headlights swallowed whole. I could barely see my own hands on the wheel. The trees leaned close, their branches brushing the sides of the car. Every turn felt slower than the last. The fog held me like it wanted to keep me from moving. Then the cabin appeared, a shadow against the gray, barely there. I stopped. The engine ticked softly in the cold. Somewhere beyond the tree line, leaves rustled. I told myself it was just the wind. A pale light blinked inside. I hadn't turned on any lamps, yet the glow pulsed, slow, deliberate. It made the fog shimmer like water. I stepped out. The gravel crunched under my boots, each step heavier than the last. The air was damp, clinging to my skin. The door creaked. It opened on its own. A soft groan, barely audible, rolled through the empty cabin. I froze. Inside, the shadows pooled in corners. The light floated, not from a bulb, but somewhere deeper. It made the walls sway, as if the cabin itself was breathing. I walked further. Saw footsteps, or maybe echoes of my own, followed. I wanted to turn back, but curiosity anchored me in place. The furniture was old. A chair tilted, though I hadn't touched it. A window rattled, though the air outside was still. Everything felt waiting. From the corner of my eye, a movement. A figure, perhaps, or a trick of fog and light. It receded as soon as I blinked. I held my breath. The hum began. Low, steady, under the floorboards, inside the walls. It was a sound you felt in your chest before your ears. I didn't move. I reached the fireplace. Nothing there but shadows. Yet the pale light flickered over the mantel. And I saw something, a photograph. A family smiling, but their eyes were hollow. Not quite empty, but wrong. The air thickened. I touched the frame. Cold. Like the fog outside had seeped through wood and glass. A faint whisper curled around my ear. I spun. Nothing. The room was silent. But the feeling remained curling around my spine. Outside, fog pressed against the windows. It looked alive. Soft shapes danced in the gray. I thought I saw someone or something watching from the tree line. I moved toward the staircase. Each step groaned under my weight. The air was heavier here. Breath shallow, heart louder. Halfway up, a shadow passed across the wall. I couldn't tell if it belonged to me or if it had another source. I froze, letting the silence stretch. The fog outside seemed to pulse in rhythm with it. At the top, a single door. Closed but not locked. The pale light flickered beneath the crack. I reached for the handle. It was warm. Oddly, impossibly warm. As my fingers brushed it, the light inside dimmed. I felt it watching. I opened the door slowly. Nothing but a room. Empty, save for dust motes drifting in the pale glow. A chair sat facing the window, perfectly still. I stepped closer. And then a soft tapping. Not at the window, not at the door, but behind me. I turned too fast. The room held only shadows. The tapping stopped. The hum lingered. I sank onto the chair. Fog pressed against the glass. I watched it twist and curl, a river of gray and white. Outside, the tree line shivered. Minutes passed, or hours. Time lost meaning. I felt both present and observed. A soft rustle, and then nothing. The light blinked once, slowly, and went out. Darkness filled the cabin. I stayed still, listening to the fog, the silence, my own breath. Something waited in the gray beyond, and I knew it would not leave. The cabin smelled faintly of pine and dust. Evening light stretched pale and thin across the wooden floor. I unpacked my things slowly, listening to the hum of the forest outside. The radio sat in the corner, its dial worn and edges rounded with age. I turned the knob. A low static filled the room, soft at first, like distant rainfall, then a voice, a whisper. My name. I froze. It wasn't human. Not exactly. It carried a softness that shouldn't belong to any living person. I tried to turn the dial, to switch the station. The static shifted, growing heavier, thicker. The voice followed, closer now, bending words I didn't intend to think. I sat on the edge of the bed, breath shallow. Each pulse of the dial seemed to echo inside my skull. The cabin was too quiet. Even the wind had softened. I reached out, trembling, fingers brushing the dial. The whisper became sharper, clearer, almost reflective. It said things I was only thinking, murmured fears I hadn't spoken aloud. A shadow passed across the wall. I hadn't moved, yet something slid by, silent, patient. The radio hummed. It hummed with me. I tried to tell myself it was the wires, the old circuits settling. But the voice knew. It knew the tiny tremor of my hands, the knot in my stomach, the way I could not look away from the wall. The dial refused to turn smoothly. Every notch seemed predetermined. Every adjustment brought the whisper nearer until it was indistinguishable from my own thoughts. I pressed my palm to my forehead. The air had thickened. The room felt smaller, tighter, like the cabin itself was listening. Even the pine scent now carried a strange metallic note. I whispered back, almost without realizing. A question, soft, uncertain. The radio replied instantly. It repeated my words slower this time. Soft, deliberate. Something brushed my shoulder. I didn't turn. I dared not. It wasn't heavy. Not solid, just awareness. The whisper pulsed with rhythm, as if breathing with me. It mirrored my heartbeat. Slow, fast, slow. I could feel the room leaning inward, closing with each wave of static. I tried to leave. My feet moved, but the floor seemed to stretch. Every step came after a pause, after a silence that felt too deliberate, too knowing. The radio, it was not in the corner anymore. Or maybe I had moved. Maybe the corner had moved. Either way, I couldn't locate it. And the whisper had changed. It laughed softly. A sound like glass brushing together. Or leaves scraping a window in the night. I didn't understand it. I didn't want to. I sank to the floor. The static roared in my ears, drowning the faint hum of the forest outside. My name repeated over and over. A dozen voices now, all echoing, overlapping, yet none truly human. I closed my eyes, hoped for silence, hoped for sleep, hoped the cabin would forget I existed for just a moment. But the whisper, it learned my fears. It traced them, soft fingers along the edges of my mind. I could not run from it. Not in this room. Not anywhere near this radio. A single thought passed through me, clear and cold. I was not alone, and perhaps I never had been. I opened my eyes. The room was still. The radio sat in the corner again, harmless in appearance. Yet a trace of static lingered in the air. I didn't touch it. I didn't move. I only listened. And in the silence, I realized it was still listening too, soft, patient, waiting. The room felt infinite. Or maybe it was just me, shrinking in the hum. I could feel the whisper still hovering on the edge of thought, matching my pulse, matching my breath. Outside, the wind stirred. A branch tapped the window. Nothing more, but I could still hear it. My name. The fog had been creeping in all evening, pooling low between the pines. I walked slowly along the narrow path, my boots pressing softly into the damp earth. Each step seemed louder than the last. The trees leaned closer as I moved. Their branches whispered, though no wind stirred. I thought I saw movement, just at the edge of my vision, but it always vanished when I blinked. Something was off. Too quiet, too precise. The forest's hum. It didn't belong entirely to the birds. A branch cracked behind me. I froze. Breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat. It cracked again, and again, each pop sharp, deliberate, echoing along the fogged trunks. I wanted to turn, wanted to run, but my legs were only partly mine. A shadow passed across the pale light of the moon, stretched thin, almost human, but wrong. It didn't move like I expected. More like the air had decided to shape itself into someone, then dissolve. I swallowed hard. The path narrowed. The fog thickened, curling around my knees, my waist. The smell of wet pine needles and decay pressed against my face. I heard it then. Rustling. Slow, deliberate, circling just beyond the reach of the fog. I held my breath. It stopped. I moved another rustle, closer this time. Closer than any deer would dare. I told myself it was wind, but the wind didn't step. It didn't pause. It didn't seem to be watching. A flicker of white, tall and thin between the trunks. It wasn't quite a person, not quite a shadow. It looked like the forest itself had risen and reached for me. I stepped back. Branches scraped my jacket, leaving thin lines across my skin. The rustling followed. Always just beyond the fog. I wanted to call out, but my voice seemed swallowed. Even the fog seemed to lean toward me, listening. The silence between the rustles was heavier than the rustling itself. A smell, faint but sharp, drifted past. Metallic. Old. Blood, maybe, or wet rust. My stomach tightened. I forced myself forward. The trees opened briefly. A clearing. Pale moonlight glinting off something low in the grass. I squinted. A figure, crouched, still, staring. I blinked. It was gone. I shook my head. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Maybe the forest had simply wanted to remind me how alone I was. I kept walking. The fog pressed closer, and the rustling stayed behind me, then beside me, then ahead. It was patient, waiting, learning my pace. A branch snapped sharply, much closer now. I turned. Nothing. And yet, I felt it. Watching. Waiting. Drawing closer without a sound. The path twisted. I stumbled over roots hidden beneath the fog. My palms scraped the earth, wet and cold. When I looked up, the clearing was gone. The path was gone. The forest hummed again. A rhythm too precise. Too intentional. I stopped. I couldn't hear my own heartbeat over it. Or maybe I didn't want to. Something flickered in the fog. A pale shape, elongated, swaying slightly, like a reed in water. It stared. I stared back. Then it vanished. No rustle, no snap. Just silence. I waited. Nothing moved. The fog seemed to breathe around me, and then soft, almost imperceptible. A footstep, just one. Behind me, I didn't turn. I didn't run. I walked forward slowly. Every step measured, every breath shallow. The forest swallowed the sound of my boots. The fog swallowed the moon. And yet, I felt eyes, always at the edge of thought, always at the edge of vision. I don't know how long I walked. Minutes, hours. Time twisted in the fog. And then, just as quietly as it began, the rustling stopped. The forest went still. Even the wind didn't dare stir. I was alone. Or perhaps I was not. I stood in the center of the path. The fog around me swirled and thinned. A pale light touched my face, and I realized the forest remembered me. And it was patient. I stepped forward again, and the silence followed, waiting for the next mistake. The forest was quiet, though not empty. A pale mist clung to the ground, curling around the roots like soft fingers. Night had settled, though the moon hid behind a low bank of clouds. I walked slowly, my boots sinking into the damp earth. Every step sounded louder than it should. Leaves rustled, though no wind moved them. Then I saw it. A dim light hovered above the clearing. It pulsed gently, almost lazily, like it was breathing. I froze. My heartbeat matched its rhythm without me asking it to. It felt impossible. I could feel it in my chest. In my temples, in the hollow behind my eyes, I wanted to approach. I told myself it was just a lantern, a stranded hiker's campfire, but the light didn't sit on the ground. It floated and it shifted, sometimes closer, sometimes further, but never leaving my sight. The air grew thick. My lungs felt sluggish as though breathing meant pulling against water. My legs were lead. I stumbled and almost fell. The light pulsed again, faster, and I thought I could hear it. A soft hum, rising and falling in perfect cadence with my heartbeat. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, though I hadn't noticed before. Fingers curled into the dirt. The hum grew stronger. It was louder than it had any right to be. Then it moved. Not like a floating lantern. Not like anything I'd seen. It twisted and stretched, elongating into shapes that didn't make sense. A soft, pale radiance skittered across the trees. Branches bent slightly, like the wind had returned. But there was no wind. I whispered a name. My own, maybe. I didn't know why. The light paused. I froze in place, caught somewhere between wanting to flee and wanting to see it closer. I felt it then, inside my skull. A pressure, a pulse. It wasn't outside me. It was inside. My thoughts echoed against it, bouncing back in pale flashes of memory I hadn't touched in years. I saw my childhood bedroom. The cupboard door slightly ajar. The hum pulsed with it. A toy car, rusted and dusty, rolled forward by itself. Then nothing. Silence, thick and sudden. I blinked, trying to see the clearing again. The light lingered, dim and hovering, but somehow closer now. Or perhaps I was closer to it. I couldn't tell. I tried to step back. My legs refused. The mist grew around my feet, curling higher until it met my knees. Cold seeped into my bones. And still the light pulsed, patient, unwavering inside me. I crouched, my hands pressed to my temples. The pulse became sharper. A whisper, maybe my own, maybe something else, brushing across the edges of my mind. It wasn't words. Not exactly, just something that made me feel remembered in ways I shouldn't. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, the light had split. 2, maybe 3, smaller lights now, hovering like curious insects. Each beat, each pulse, felt like a finger tracing the inside of my skull. A gentle probing, intimate and unrelenting. I wanted to speak, to ask it to stop. The sound wouldn't leave my mouth. My throat felt full of thick fog. The clearing tilted just a fraction and I swayed. The lights followed, dancing around me. Each beat thrummed deeper, and I realized my heartbeat had slowed. Then stopped, then started again in staggering increments. Something moved behind me. Soft footsteps, a rustle. I dared not look. But the light expanded, filling the edges of my vision with pale pressure. It made shapes, like faces, or maybe the memory of faces. Familiar, yet impossible. I sank to the ground, palms pressed against the cold earth. The mist around me was denser now, swallowing the clearing in gray softness. The lights hovered above, then lowered, then one touched my forehead. Warmth, soft, faintly electric. And a whisper, clearer now, I know you. I tried to resist, to pull away. But the hum and pulse had become my own. My thoughts belonged to it as much as it belonged to me. And for a moment, I could not tell where I ended or where it began. Then the lights rose. They left, drifting upward, fading into the mist. The pulse slowed. My legs worked again. The fog thinned. I remained on the ground. The clearing was empty. But somewhere, deep inside, the light had stayed. A soft echo of its presence. I could feel it, humming still, waiting. I rose slowly, and the night felt heavier than before. The mist had returned to the earth, curling like fingers retreating. I walked back through the forest. Each step was quiet, yet carried a lingering hum. A pale, unshakable pulse inside my mind, and sometimes, when the night is still, I see it again, hovering just beyond the edge of my vision. Waiting patient, the night was brittle. Frost edged the window panes. I lay under the thin blanket, listening to the wind sigh along the eaves. It carried fragments of words, my own, I thought at first, but too sharp, too knowing. I pulled the blanket tighter, feeling the chill of something unseen. The room smelled faintly of old wood and something else I couldn't name. Shadows pooled in the corners, darkening the edges of the ceiling. I tried to focus on the familiar shapes, the dresser, the chair, the bed, but they all seemed wrong. Slightly off, watching, I turned onto my side. A soft draft brushed my neck, a finger of air that made my skin prickle. I imagined it was the window, cracked just slightly, but the wind had no hands. Then I felt it, eyes tracing every motion. Not just observing, knowing. A weight behind my eyelids pressing me down. I didn't move. I couldn't. The curtains shivered, though the air was still. I whispered to myself, quiet, almost apologetic. Just imagination. But the silence replied with its own hum, low and persistent. The floorboards groaned in the hall outside. Soft, almost polite footsteps. They paused, waiting. The pause stretched. I held my breath. And when the steps continued, I realized I hadn't heard them before. They were inside. The lamp flickered. A pale light spilled across the walls, revealing nothing, yet suggesting everything. A shadow lengthened behind the dresser, dark and hunched. I blinked. It was gone. I told myself it was my own mind conjuring shapes in the dark. But the unease had teeth. It gnawed at the edges of thought, leaving jagged fragments of panic. I shifted slightly. The bed creaked. A soft, deliberate drag of fabric whispered just beyond the mattress. I froze. A breath, colder than the room, passed over my ear. I felt the room tighten, walls bending inward, listening. The window rattled. A single leaf scraped across the sill. Then nothing, except a gaze. I turned again, slow, careful, almost ritualistic. Nothing. Just the blank stare of the empty room. Yet, behind my shoulder, the weight persisted. I tried to focus on small things. My hands, the texture of the blanket, the ticking of the clock. But each tick was a pulse, a countdown. The shadows shifted in rhythm. The hum of silence filled the space between beats. A whisper slipped through the corners of the room. Not words I knew, not sounds I could place. But I understood it anyway. I was not alone. The voice folded into the darkness, stretching its fingers over the furniture, the walls, the ceiling. I closed my eyes, tried to imagine the warmth of sunlight, of normality. But the darkness clung, pliable and patient. It traced my arms, slid across my knees, curled behind my neck. I heard it in the faint dragging of air along the floorboards, saw it in the twitch of shadows across the ceiling, felt it in the pull of the bed, as though gravity itself had softened toward something unseen. I whispered, softly, just to break the tension. "Who's there?" No answer. Only the wind, now colder, sharper, pressing through the cracks. I listened for hours. The night expanded, slow and pliant. Shadows played along the corners, curling and uncurling like liquid. My heartbeat thudded in the empty spaces, a metronome for a presence I could not see. I imagined leaving, stepping into the hall, into light. But the room resisted, held me. I realized then this was not curiosity, not a game. It was waiting. Patient, silent, endless. Morning would come. The frost would fade. The sun would scatter the shadows. But I knew, when I closed my eyes again, the weight, the eyes, the quiet watching would return. I breathed, shallow, careful, trying to convince myself. And in the pause between exhales, I felt it again. Patient, watching, always just beyond sight. And I stayed, pretending to sleep. The morning was pale. Mist clung to the ground like it was afraid to leave. I stepped outside, slippers brushing against damp grass, and froze. Footprints. They were long. Too long. Uneven. Like someone had stumbled and caught themselves. They weren't the tracks of anything I knew. I crouched closer. The edges shimmered faintly, as if the light itself couldn't touch them fully. Each print seemed hollow, but solid enough to make the grass bend. The air tasted cold and thin. I leaned in, breath fogging, and noticed that the print stopped. Just ended at the edge of the tree line. I glanced up, expecting to see a person. Nothing moved. The trees whispered with a wind that didn't exist. I felt the shift before I heard it. A pause in the birds. Even the hum of the morning seemed hesitant. The prints were too deliberate to be an accident. Too strange to ignore. I followed them. Careful. Each step feeling heavier than the last. The fog thickened around the trunks. Shadows pooled like spilled ink. I wanted to call out. Wanted someone to answer. But the sound died in my throat. Leaves rustled. Not from the breeze, I realized. Something moved deeper in the forest, pacing just beyond sight. I stopped. My eyes strained, trying to catch any movement. The prints glimmered faintly in the soft light behind me. I knelt and pressed a finger against the ground. The soil felt wrong, cool, almost wet, not dirt. Not earth, I recognized. Then I saw it. A smear of pale skin, or maybe fog had settled in a shape too deliberate to be natural. It led from one footprint to the next. The sound of soft footsteps followed me. I wasn't walking. They didn't fall in rhythm with my own. I turned sharply. Nothing. Just the trees and the fog and the faint shimmer of those footprints fading into shadow. I wanted to run, but the forest had changed. Paths I knew from years of wandering twisted subtly, as if they remembered me differently than I remembered them. The prints appeared again, deeper in, as if marking a trail I couldn't refuse. Each step I took felt mirrored, not my shadow, something else, shifting alongside me. I imagined voices, low, indecipherable, like whispers just beyond understanding. They stopped whenever I froze. A branch cracked. I jerked my head. Something crouched behind the thick trunk, tall and still. I blinked. It vanished. Only the prints remained, longer, uneven, and perfect in their imperfection. I reached the clearing where they ended abruptly. The space between the trees seemed wider. The fog rolled heavier here, and light fractured strangely, bending where it shouldn't. I could feel it then. Waiting. Watching. Silence thicker than the mist pressed in. I traced a final footprint. It was almost transparent, but enough to see tiny ridges, like skin pressed against soft ground. I lifted my hand and it trembled. The air between my fingers felt solid. I wanted to leave, but something anchored me, rooted in the edge of perception. It wasn't a creature, not exactly, but not entirely absent either. A breeze slipped through the trees, carrying the scent of wet stone and something faintly metallic. My heart slowed in that pause. Even the fog held its breath. The tree line seemed alive now. Shadows shifted without source. A shape, tall and faint, moved just beyond visibility. I whispered to myself. The sound didn't carry. It returned to me muffled, stretched, like the fog had swallowed and returned it differently. I stepped back toward the house. The prints, they didn't follow. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being marked. A reminder pressed lightly on my shoulder, unseen but present. The morning dragged. Time felt fractured. Every glance toward the tree line suggested motion that never fully revealed itself. By noon, the fog thinned. The prints were gone, leaving only wet grass and the faint scent of cold stone. I couldn't explain it, not yet. I didn't want to. Sometimes at dusk, I catch a glimpse of them, shimmering just beyond the edge of light. Long, uneven, fading, and then returning like a rhythm I cannot follow. I don't know why they stopped at the trees, or why they ever came so close. But I feel them still, resting quietly, waiting for a day when I might notice, a little too late. And sometimes when the wind is wrong, I swear I hear soft footsteps brushing the fog. Brushing close. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. Fog curled low along the forest floor, pale and restless. I stepped onto the narrow path, the morning light barely reaching the soil beneath the canopy. The trail was quiet at first. A gentle rustle here, a snap of twigs there. I told myself it was just the wind, brushing the branches like fingers over skin. The path narrowed. I thought I could hear footsteps behind me, soft, deliberate, but when I turned, nothing stirred. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow mirrored my own. I followed the trail deeper. Leaves pressed against my ankles, damp with fog. The further I walked, the less familiar the woods became, though I had just been there moments ago. I paused. A sudden silence fell, thick and hollow. The hum of the forest seemed to vanish, leaving only my own uneven breath. I called out softly. My voice cracked. It swallowed itself against the damp trunks. I stepped forward. The path vanished. Where a trail should have led, only a continuous stretch of moss and underbrush remained. I turned back. The entrance I had passed barely looked like an opening now. Every tree was identical. A pale, staring wall of bark and shadow. I tried to retrace my steps. Twigs snapped underfoot, but the sounds echoed strangely, delayed, distorted. It was as if the forest had swallowed the first sound and then spat it back at me, wrong. I stopped again. I listened. The rustling moved with me, though the air was still. I whispered, hoping someone, anyone, might answer. The reply came soft and uncertain. A whisper, but not mine. I froze. It carried no words I could understand, just breath. Exhaled near, yet unseen. The fog thickened. Shapes flickered in the corners of my vision. I blinked. They were gone. Or maybe I had never seen them at all. I stumbled over a root, and the ground beneath me felt hollow. For a second, I thought I might fall into darkness itself. I didn't, but the sensation lingered, like the earth had almost claimed me. A strange smell rose like smoke curling over wet moss. It wasn't fire, but something burning faint and acrid. I inhaled carefully. My chest tightened. I moved forward, each step heavier than the last. The whisper followed, always behind, always close enough to chill my neck. I tried to focus, look at the light, at the fog, at anything real. But the trees closed in, mirrors of one another, pale and waiting. I reached a small clearing. Moonlight pooled weakly on the ground, shifting across wet stones. A single branch quivered, though the air was still. I crouched, trying to catch my breath. Soft footsteps circled the clearing, always behind. Every attempt to look over my shoulder left me staring at nothing. Then a strange calm settled. The whispers slowed. The fog softened, curling around me like a lullaby I didn't remember hearing. I tried to walk again. The path returned, faint and trembling, barely more than impressions on the earth. Each step forward felt both right and wrong. I realized the forest had changed. I had changed! Even the air smelled different, as if the woods had exhaled me from its own lungs. I kept walking. The trail dissolved behind me, leaf by leaf, fading into nothingness. Every glance back showed only trees, endless and identical, and yet I didn't stop. Each step became a promise I didn't want to keep, a path I was walking toward, though I didn't know where it began or where it ended. I paused once more. The fog swirled around my ankles, soft and persistent. I listened. The whispers had stopped, but the silence left its own echo. I turned slowly, letting the forest fill my vision. No trail, no path, only the pale, breathing shadows of trees waiting. I walked, and I walked, leaving nothing behind but the soft, vanishing footprints that would never guide me home. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. Outside, the wind had begun its slow moan through the pine trees. The branches scraped against the window, leaving pale streaks of shadow across the floor. I had lit the small lamp in the corner. Its glow was weak, tremulous, and yet it seemed enough to push the dark back, or maybe it only made it stretch further. Shadows clung to the walls. Not still, not quiet. They moved, twisted slowly like smoke caught in a draft, like they had a life of their own. I hadn't touched the lamp. It had not fallen. And still the shape swayed, curled, and sometimes, just for a heartbeat, looked almost human. A whisper brushed past my ear. So soft I thought I had imagined it. But it was there, faint as the flicker of the flame. My name! I held my breath. The shadows paused. Or perhaps I had. A single line of light wavered across the wall and something shifted behind it. Something small. Something slow. I moved my hand toward the lamp. The warmth of it steadied me. The shadows did not retreat. They only leaned closer, curling at corners, pooling at the edges of the floorboards. The wind outside rose, urgent, insistent. It carried a scent, wet pine, smoke, something metallic. I could almost taste it. And the whisper returned, soft, endless, tangled with the hum of the lamp. I tried to speak. My own voice felt heavy, strangled by the darkness. A pause. Then a sound, low and careful. Footsteps, not mine. Slow, pacing, circling the edges of the room. I pressed myself against the wall. The shadows reacted. They flickered faster, reaching toward me like thin, reaching fingers of black. The lamp flickered in response, casting a soft, uneasy stutter of light. I shut my eyes. It didn't stop. The room hummed around me, alive with quiet. The whisper carried on. My name. Then, nothing. The silence was worse, thicker. It pressed in, a velvet weight on my chest. And in that pause, I could feel the space between shadows, stretching, breathing. A window rattled. I hadn't heard the wind move outside for a while. I opened my eyes. The shapes were gone. The lamp burned steady. I should have felt relief, but something lingered. A faint movement in the corner. A pale smudge of shadow, curling like smoke just before dawn. It wasn't quite there. Or maybe it had always been there. I leaned toward it, half expecting nothing, and then the whisper returned. Closer this time. Inside my ear, a thread of sound I could not untangle. Just my name, and a soft rustle like a coat brushing the floor. I could not turn toward it. Could not call out. Could not move. The cabin was alive in that hush, a quiet heartbeat beneath the walls. Time slowed. The lamp flickered again. The shadows pulsed with each small stutter of light. And I understood, somewhere beyond the edges of sense, something was watching. I wrapped my arms around myself. The wind fell away. The branches stopped scratching. Even the whisper faded. Yet the shapes lingered in memory. Stretching. Waiting. I lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling. The room breathed in rhythm with me. And just as my eyes began to drift closed, the faintest flicker of shadow touched the corner of my vision. A soft, curling edge of darkness that moved. Without sound, I didn't dare look again. The lamp glowed steadily. But the shadows knew I could not leave, and so I stayed, listening to the hum, the breath, the whisper. As the dark moved just beyond the light, slowly, endlessly, and I realized I had never been alone. The air felt heavy tonight. A metallic tang lingered, sharp and sour. It clung to my tongue, made my stomach twist. I walked slowly along the narrow path behind the old houses. Puddles shimmered under pale lamplight, but their reflections looked wrong, too jagged, too alive. Each step sank softly into wet leaves. I thought I heard footsteps echoing mine, but the mist swallowed sound before it reached me. The smell grew stronger near the river bend. It wasn't just iron, something else, sharp, acrid, almost sweet. I paused. The wind carried a faint rustling like someone or something moving just beyond the fog. A flash of movement caught my eye. A shadow flickered across the water, pale and thin, vanishing before I could focus. My throat tightened. I tried to tell myself it was just imagination, the way light plays tricks on tired eyes, but the metallic scent clawed deeper, searing at the back of my mouth. It made me want to vomit, but I couldn't stop walking. A figure appeared then, not fully there, as if painted from the mist itself. It mirrored me, stepping where I stepped, but slower. Its outline trembled, wavering in the dim light. I blinked, and it was gone. The silence left a ringing in my ears, like the hum of metal under pressure. The air thickened again, and the scent now burned in my nose. I thought of blood, though I didn't see any. Soft footsteps approached from behind. I froze. The fog parted just enough to reveal nothing, yet I could feel it. Eyes or intentions pressing against the back of my neck. My heart beat loud, but I told myself it was just the rustling leaves. The river's surface quivered. Reflections twisted unnaturally, faces forming briefly in the pale light before dissolving into ripples. I stepped closer, compelled to look again. A hand-like shadow brushed the water's edge. I wanted to call out. My voice caught, stuck in the metallic thickness. Even breathing felt wrong. The smell turned sharper still, like iron grinding under a blade. I gagged, tried to look away, but the fog seemed to pull my gaze back. Figures danced at the corner of my vision. They weren't clear, only fleeting silhouettes, pale and trembling. Each one seemed to reach for me, then vanish. I remembered the bridge ahead. Its old wood creaked under my tentative steps, every plank moaning in the silence. The river below glimmered with a strange light. Something beneath it moved, just out of reach, silver and slippery. I stopped, unable to step forward. The scent pressed in, tight and cold, filling my lungs until I felt dizzy. A whisper carried across the water. I couldn't make out words, but it was soft, urgent, as if the river itself was trying to warn me. The mist swirled and shadows began leaning toward me, stretching like smoke. Each shadow mirrored a fear I hadn't named yet. I closed my eyes. The metallic smell burned through my eyelids. I wanted to run, but something kept me rooted. Then I felt it, a soft brush across my shoulder. Not wind, not fog. Something alive, cold and impossibly close. I spun, expecting to see anything. The path behind me was empty, but the fog seemed thicker, darker. The river whispered again, and the light on the water pulsed. Not like a reflection, something beneath moving in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I stepped back. The air grew denser, metallic taste coating every thought. Figures appeared once more, just at the edge of my vision, their shapes twisting and fading, as if the fog itself had a pulse. And I was trapped inside it. I wanted to turn and leave, but the scent would not let me. It pressed into my chest, into my mouth, into every silent corner of my mind. I reached the bridge's end. The fog thinned slightly. For a moment, I thought I was free. Then I looked down. Something gleamed beneath the water, sharp, silver, and impossibly still. The reflection wasn't mine. A chill rose through my spine. The metallic smell lingered even as I stepped onto solid ground. It followed me like a shadow I could not shake, whispering that it had only begun to watch. I kept walking. The night was quiet now. Too quiet, but I could feel it, just behind the fog, waiting for the next taste of the iron air. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, the snow pressed softly against the windows. Pale light shimmered through, drifting across the wooden floor. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. Then it came. A hollow thump, low, echoing. From below, it pulsed again. A steady, deliberate rhythm that didn't belong to the house. Not yesterday. Not ever. I froze. The floor beneath my feet seemed to hum with it, a resonance that tickled my bones. I followed the sound, my steps careful, hesitant. It led me to the far corner of the cabin, near where the floorboards were slightly warped. There it was, a door. A basement door. I swear it wasn't there yesterday. The wood looked older than the rest of the cabin, darker, slick with something I couldn't name. The handle trembled under my hand, though the air was still. I opened it. A chill rolled up my spine, carrying the scent of damp earth and something ancient. The steps spiraled down into darkness. I couldn't see the bottom. The thumping continued, louder now, vibrating through the walls. Each step I took echoed. The echo didn't match my own footsteps. There was another, below, waiting. I stopped. I could hear it then. A shifting, soft, deliberate, like breathing, but uneven. I wanted to run, but my feet were glued to the floor. A faint light shimmered from somewhere deep beneath. Not electric, not natural. Just a pale glow that seemed to breathe along with the thump. I followed it, the basement air swallowing me whole. My chest felt hollow, mirroring the sound beneath my feet. The walls were close, pressing in. They seemed to lean toward me, whispering with the rustle of old wood. The thump changed then, slower, more deliberate, like it was counting me, watching. I reached the bottom. The glow pooled around a small pit in the center of the floor. The thumping came from there, hollow, hungry. I knelt by the edge. Something moved, a shadow, just a ripple at first. Then shapes, slithering along the dirt walls, almost human, almost not. I couldn't see faces, only movement, curling and uncurling, aware of me. The pit wasn't empty. Something underground knew I was here. It shifted, pulled at the walls, reached with a wet, soft scrape that made the hair on my arms stand. I wanted to scream. My voice lodged itself in my throat. Instead, I whispered, my breath visible in the cold, stale air. It listened. I backed away. The thump slowed, then stopped. Silence, heavy, waiting. I could feel it under the floor, under the cabin, under my skin, watching, still, patient. I wanted to leave. But the stairs, they were gone. Only the pit remained. Only the glow. Only the hollow thump, now a pulse in my chest. I touched the edge of the pit, and the ground shifted beneath me. Soft, wet, alive. A whispering hum rose from it. Not a sound I could understand, only feel. Something cold brushed my hand. Not solid, not flesh, not air. Something in between, aware of every shiver and hesitation. I pulled back, heart hammering, breath shallow. The glow receded as if it had been testing me. The thump softened. Almost a sigh, I climbed, or thought I climbed. The stairs weren't there, but somehow I was back in the cabin. The snow outside had stopped. The wind was still. The cabin held its silence. But the hollow sound lingered. Not loud. Not frightening, not yet. Just a pulse beneath the floor. Beneath everything. Waiting. I cannot sleep. I cannot stop listening. Every creak, every settling of the cabin, every quiet thump beneath the floor makes me wonder if I'm truly alone. And when I close my eyes, I feel it, brushing against my thoughts, aware, patient. The hollow sound is not finished. It will not let me be, and sometimes, in the quietest moments. I swear it hums my name. The fog had settled thickly over the street, the kind that makes every street lamp bleed into the next. I was alone, of course. My apartment on the 3rd floor felt smaller in the gray light of early evening. The window was open a crack. A slight draft stirred the curtains. At first it was nothing. Just the city, quieting down, footsteps fading, a distant hum of tires on wet asphalt. Then I saw them, too pale, eyes almond-shaped, floating outside the glass, blinked. They were gone. I blinked. Again. There. Watching. Waiting. They weren't human. I knew that immediately. But they were familiar. In the way a forgotten memory can cling to your skin. I held my breath. The fog pressed against the glass. Every shadow seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heart. I thought I heard a whisper. Or maybe it was only the wind. It carried my name, I think. Or a sound too close to it. I stepped back. The curtain fluttered, brushing my arm. The eyes lingered in the space just beyond, as if testing the barrier between us. I leaned closer, trying to convince myself I was imagining it, but they were there, always there in the reflection of the streetlight bouncing on the glass. I remembered the stories about the pale-eyed watchers, the ones who don't move but always see. I never believed them, not fully. Now I wasn't so sure. A rustling came from behind the window. Not loud, subtle, like silk over skin. I froze. The eyes narrowed slightly. Or maybe my imagination gave them that motion. The light from the hallway spilled across the room. The reflection of my own eyes met theirs for a moment, and I felt it, the uncanny mirror of recognition. Shouldn't have looked for long. I couldn't look away. There was a tension in the air, a hum, low, almost imperceptible. It filled the corners of the room, vibrating gently against my ribs. I whispered. My own voice startled me. The eyes blinked. I stumbled back. The fog thickened outside. It pressed against the glass like a living thing. The edges of the window frame seemed to warp, curved, twisting. A shadow stretched across the floor. My own, but wrong, longer, slower, lingering where it shouldn't. The eyes hadn't moved, but the shadow was alive. Soft footsteps traced along the corridor behind me. I held my breath again. The room was too still now, too expectant. The pale light of the street lamp fell through the window, cutting through the fog, and then the eyes disappeared. Just like that. I waited. The silence was heavy, almost tactile. The window creaked. A shift in the wind or something else. I thought I saw movement at the edge of the glass, something pale, something that shouldn't have been. I backed away slowly. The eyes returned, closer now. Pressed against the cold window, I tried to focus. The outline, the shape. It was thin, elongated, just beyond the human frame. The almond shape glimmered in the dim light. I couldn't breathe, and still, I couldn't look away. A hum again, louder this time, resonating through my chest. I felt the room tighten around me. The curtain twisted in a way it hadn't before. The shadow on the floor moved with a mind of its own, curling toward the corner where the eyes had vanished. A flicker of motion, like a heartbeat in the fog. The apartment smelled colder, cleaner, sterile. Almost. I shivered. I pressed my hands against the wall, trying to remind myself where the edges of reality were. I wasn't sure which side of the glass I belonged on anymore. The eyes lingered again in the reflection, pale and unblinking. I whispered, Something small. My own name, it repeated. A soft echo, just beyond comprehension. I didn't want to look directly at it, so I let my gaze drift to the floor. The shadow receded slightly, but the hum stayed. I could feel it there, pressing in, waiting. I couldn't hear my own heartbeat anymore. Only that low, persistent vibration, and then silence. I stayed by the window long after the eyes vanished. The fog thinned, leaving the street pale and washed out. I didn't close the window. The curtain fluttered softly. I kept the light dim. And sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I think I see them again. Two pale eyes, watching, waiting. And I can't quite tell if they belong to me or if I belong to them. The forest waited. Fog clung to the ground like a restless breath. Pale light filtered through twisted branches, pooling in shapes I couldn't name. I walked slowly, the damp earth soft beneath my feet. Every step pressed my own weight into the silence. It felt wrong. A twig snapped behind me. I froze, but nothing moved. The air was still, yet the trees seemed to hum. At first I thought it was wind, a low rustling, curling around the trunks, brushing my ears. Then the whispers began, soft, fragile, like the trees were leaning close. They said things I hadn't spoken aloud in years. My regrets, my fears, names I had buried deep. Each branch arched toward me. Every leaf trembled in rhythm with memories I had tried to forget. I wanted to run, but my feet were heavy. The forest breathed around me, a quiet inhalation, stretching shadows over my skin. I heard the same word over and over. My name! A shiver ran down my spine. The whispers grew sharper, clearer. Secrets I hadn't admitted, not even to myself, spilled into the fog. A branch cracked above. I flinched. The sound echoed, bouncing between trees like soft footsteps I could not place. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the murmuring followed. Closer. Closer. I realized the forest wasn't just listening. It remembered. The ground shifted beneath me. Roots snaked like veins in pale light. They moved with intention, curling as if tracing the lines of my body. I knelt, feeling the cold soil seep into my fingers. A small clearing opened before me, framed by crooked trunks. The whispers grew louder there, forming shapes in the mist. I saw a figure, just a shadow but unmistakably aware. It mirrored me. Every movement, every hesitation, I held my breath. The fog thickened, swallowing my reflection. Then, in the silence, I realized there was no reflection. The trees shifted closer. Their branches arched like watchful arms. Each snap was deliberate, echoing memories I had hidden even from the wind. A soft light glimmered on wet bark. I leaned forward, curious despite myself. Faces, pale, fleeting, glimmered between knots and leaves. They whispered not in words, but in sensation. A pull in my chest, a tightening in my throat, a weight pressing against my ribcage. The shadows danced at the edge of my vision. I turned slowly, trying to catch them, but they slipped, just out of reach. Every glance brought new shapes, familiar shapes. I realized I had walked into something alive. Not just a forest, something older, patient, waiting for me to remember. A branch brushed my shoulder. I flinched, but it didn't move away. It lingered, as though reading the story written beneath my skin. The whispers softened. I thought it might be a mercy. Then I understood. They were not stopping. They were inviting, pulling me deeper into their pale, rustling heart. Every step forward, I felt my secrets folding into the fog. I stumbled onto moss, damp and cold. The clearing widened. Shadows stretched, reaching for corners of my mind I hadn't explored. The air grew thick. Breath tasted like wet leaves and old soil. I wanted to call out, but my voice was swallowed. Something shifted above. Branches bent, forming a circle of watchful shapes. I felt the weight of eyes unblinking and patient. Then a pause, absolute silence, the kind that presses against your skull, filling it with its own rhythm. And in that stillness, I felt the forest breathe me in. Every whisper, every snap, every soft creak became part of my own pulse. I wasn't just hearing it. I was part of it now, a final rustle. I dared a glance behind me. The path I had walked was gone. Only fog, Only trees, only quiet, and a soft, lingering hum, as if the forest remembered me better than I remembered myself. The cabin sat at the edge of the clearing. Night had already begun to drape over the trees. A pale fog curled along the ground, thin and hesitant. I had been sitting near the stove, trying to feel warmth, but the cold had seeped into my bones hours ago. The wind whispered against the wooden walls like soft fingers. Then it happened. The door creaked, slowly, unevenly. I hadn't touched it. I froze. Every muscle stiffened. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. A shadow stretched across the threshold. The dim light of the moon caught it just enough. I could make out a figure. Still, waiting. I wanted to call out. My voice fractured before it left my throat. I wanted to run. My legs refused. The wind carried a faint rustle. Something brushed against the outside wall. Or maybe it was just the fog, curling and twisting in shapes too quick to name. I blinked. The figure had shifted, closer. I could see nothing, just a darkness that didn't belong to the night. I told myself it was a trick, eyes playing on the fog, the reflection of moonlight on the wet grass. But the door, it moved again. A soft, slow push inward, and the scent came first. Earth, damp and old, and something else, metallic, faint but certain. My heart thumped in my ears. It was deafening, but somehow silent at the same time. The figure, it didn't step. It drifted, weightless. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, air-heavy. Every shadow lengthened, curling into corners it had no right to touch. I could hear a soft scrape, like fingernails across wood. My gaze snapped to the figure. It hadn't moved its arms, or maybe it had none. The stove hummed, a low, steady vibration through the floor, and then it stopped. Sudden silence, so complete that my own breath startled me. The figure leaned slightly forward. Not threatening. Not human. Just waiting, and I couldn't look away. Something in the fog shifted outside, a whisper of motion. It felt familiar, though I couldn't place why. The door creaked again. A little wider, I realized it wasn't opening. It had never closed fully. A memory flickered. A night years ago. Alone in a cabin. I'd felt watched. Just like this. I forced myself to move my hands, clutched at the nearest chair, but it was lighter than I remembered. Like the air itself had taken shape, and I could only hold the hollow shell. The figure tilted its head, slow, deliberate. The fog behind it swirled as though it breathed with it. I heard soft footsteps, but none touched the floor. They were all around me, and nowhere a lamp flickered in the corner. Shadows danced wildly, then froze, and the figure was gone. I blinked. The door swung gently on its hinges. Empty. The fog swallowed the clearing beyond. No footprints. No signs of life. I wanted to tell myself it was gone, that I was imagining it. But the air still hung heavy. The scent lingered. A shiver ran down my spine. Soft, deliberate. Like breath on the back of my neck, I pressed my hands to my ears, hoping to drown it out. But the silence had weight. And it waited. I sank to the floor, eyes fixed on the doorway, on the place where it had been. Time passed, or maybe it didn't. I can't tell. The fog outside thinned. The moonlight shifted. The cabin seemed ordinary again, but something had changed. The door hung slightly ajar. A faint draft stirred the air, and I realized slowly that it hadn't really left. It waited, always waiting. I couldn't close the door. I couldn't move. Only sit and listen. The air was thick tonight. The street lamps outside flickered, throwing pale light through the blinds. I had tried to sleep, but the quiet, it felt wrong. It started as a faint hum, soft, almost like a distant engine. I told myself it was the heater, or maybe the pipes settling. But when I pressed my palm to the wall, the vibration traveled up my arm, deeper than wood and plaster. I held my chest. It pulsed in sync with the hum, or maybe the hum pulsed in sync with me. I couldn't tell which was leading, which was following. I moved toward the living room, each step tentative, careful. The floorboards beneath me moaned in protest. The hum didn't falter. It grew, it had weight now. A low, heavy thrum that seemed to seep into the floor, the furniture, the walls themselves. Even the air felt dense. I sat on the couch, hoping it was nothing. closing my eyes, trying to block it out. But the vibration didn't fade. It whispered something. I couldn't catch the words at first. Just a breath of syllables that pressed against my ears. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The shadows in the corners of the room flickered, stretching into shapes that felt alive. I could almost see them pulse with the hum, rising and falling, slow and deliberate. I wanted to leave, to run outside, but something rooted me in place. The hum seemed to anchor itself in my chest, pressing, insistent. A subtle dread settled into my bones. I noticed the windows. They weren't fully closed. The blinds moved slightly in a draft I didn't feel. And the hum, it responded, pulsing faster, sharper. The temperature shifted. Cold air brushed my neck, then retreated. The hum throbbed, louder now, like it had found its voice. I told myself it was a neighbor, a car, a machine. But no machines vibrate through the floor and chest like this. No car hums through walls without leaving its tires in the street. I tried to breathe through it. In, out. But the hum matched me again, faster now, irregular, demanding. My hands shook. The lights in the room seemed dimmer than they had been. Shadows gathered near the corners, as if drawn to the sound. I wanted to look away, to close my eyes, but curiosity rooted me. The humming. It seemed almost patient now, deliberate, as though it had been waiting for me. And then, in the briefest pause between pulses, I heard it more clearly. A word, soft, almost impossible. Here, I froze. The word seemed to curl around the room, bouncing from walls to ceiling. Then silence. But the silence had weight, too. It pressed against me, a hollow space waiting for something to fill it. My heartbeat raced, trying to compete with the memory of the hum. I rose slowly, feeling the floor beneath me vibrate faintly, even without the hum. Step by step, I moved toward the bedroom. Everything in the apartment seemed to hold its breath. In the hallway, the hum returned, stronger. It made the hairs on my arms stand tall, stiff. The light from the street outside hit the wall at a strange angle. Shadows twisted there, elongated, bending. They weren't like normal shadows. They were darker, waiting. I reached the bedroom door. My fingers grazed the handle, cold metal biting my skin. The hum grew louder, louder than the space could contain, vibrating my teeth, my skull. I wanted to shut it out, slam the door, anything. But the sound seemed to push through anyway, a presence, not just a noise. I stepped inside. The hum seemed to follow, circling the corners of the room, curling around the bedposts. I pulled the blanket over my shoulders, trying to anchor myself. I told myself it would fade. Some engine, some distant noise, something rational. But the hum didn't fade. It lay under my skin now. I could feel it even when I closed my eyes, the pulse and vibration moving inside me. My chest ached in a way that wasn't mine. Then I noticed the mirror across the room. I hadn't looked at it before. The glass shimmered faintly, the reflection of the hum crawling over the surface. I stared. And in the corner of my eye, something shifted behind the reflection. Not me, not human. Just a pale, slow movement, curling, pulsing. Watching, I whispered to myself. Nothing. The hum throbbed louder, insistently. I pressed my hands to the mattress. The vibration seemed to seep through the springs, through the frame, through me. And then it slowed, softened. A single long pulse, leaving the room empty, almost too quiet. I lay there, chest tight, ears ringing, waiting. And somewhere, deep in the quiet, the faintest vibration lingered like a shadow of a sound I hadn't yet learned to hear. The night pressed close around the cabin. Fog crept in through cracks near the floorboards, soft and lingering. The air smelled of damp pine and something older, sour and waiting. I sat on the edge of the worn chair, trying to ignore the rhythm of my own pulse. Outside, the wind was restless, brushing against the thin walls. Inside, a strange warmth clung to the corners, though no fire burned. The walls, they moved. Not slowly, not like wood settling. They rippled, folding in on themselves as if the cabin were breathing. I leaned closer to the window, where the pale moonlight made the trees appear ghostly. Shadows fell crooked across the floor, stretching and shrinking without reason. I could feel something beneath them, watching, waiting. A soft hum began somewhere behind me. At first I thought it was the wind, but it was steady, low, like a voice holding its breath. The air thickened. Every step I took felt heavier, like walking through invisible water. I reached for the doorknob and my fingers grazed cold wood that shouldn't have been cold. The walls twisted again, dark forms stretching toward the ceiling. I caught glimpses, shapes that weren't entirely shapes, shifting like smoke. I tried to blink them away, but they lingered, persistent. A floorboard creaked in the corner, soft and deliberate. I froze. Soft footsteps, barely there but unmistakable. The cabin seemed to sigh around me. Panels bowed inwards, ceiling beams warped, doors no longer lined up. Everything familiar was unfamiliar. I whispered my own name. No answer. Only the faint, slow rustle of the walls responding. I couldn't tell if it was wind or something alive. The hum grew louder, vibrating through my chest. The shadows on the walls thickened, pooling in corners like ink. I watched, unable to look away, as a dark figure emerged from the ripple of the wood. It wasn't solid. Not completely. It shimmered, as if the cabin itself had shaped it from the absence of light. I blinked. It was closer. I could feel its intention, though I could not name it. A soft scrape moved along the floor, and I realized it was my own shadow stretching, warping differently from my body. I tried to step back, but the floor was no longer flat. It sloped beneath me, pulling me toward the center of the cabin. I tried to call for help. Nothing came out. My voice seemed absorbed, swallowed by the shifting walls. The pale light from outside flickered. I saw reflections that didn't belong. My own face, twisted, elongated. Eyes wide, mouth silent, staring back at me from the warped walls. Time fractured. Minutes stretched like hours, then collapsed into stillness. I felt the cabin lean closer, walls bending around me like a living cage. A silence fell so complete it felt like it could swallow my heartbeat. The figure hovered near the corner, indistinct but aware. I held my breath, hoping stillness might protect me. Something soft brushed my arm. Not hands, not fingers. A whisper of movement, like the cabin exhaling. The hum became a whisper. It wasn't saying words. It was simply watching, waiting. I moved toward the window, desperate for the familiarity of the outside. The fog had thickened, curling against the glass, hiding the trees. Even the moon seemed blurred, pale and trembling behind the mist. I realized the cabin itself was alive, shifting in response to me or perhaps to something beyond me. The walls weren't just moving, they were thinking, breathing, aware. I pressed my face to the glass. Shadows pooled at the edges, dark shapes leaning closer. I felt the cold touch of them, though nothing physically touched me. A single beam of moonlight struck the center of the room. The figure vanished, but the ripple remained. The air pulsed, thick and slow, and the floorboards hummed beneath my feet. I exhaled, and heard it, my own breath amplified, twisted, almost someone else's. I wasn't alone. Never truly alone. I backed away from the window. The walls resumed their subtle pulse, shifting quietly now, watching. And I realized as I pressed myself into the far corner that the cabin would always know I was here. Outside, the fog moved on. Inside, the shadows waited, and I waited with them. Quietly, barely breathing, as the walls whispered secrets I could not understand. Even now I can feel the dark forms pressing in, gentle yet impossible to resist. The cabin shifts, and I remain. The kitchen was quiet. I could see my breath curl in the pale light from the street lamp outside. Cold fogged the window pane, clinging like it had always been there. I pressed my palm to the glass. It was colder than the air. Outside. Nothing moved, but I could feel it. The weight of eyes. Just beyond the fog. I blinked. A faint tapping echoed behind me. I didn't turn. The air felt heavier in the room, thick with something I couldn't name. I waited. My fingers left the glass. leaving a smear of warmth on the frost. The tapping came again, softer now, closer, almost shy. I realized my own heartbeat was loud in the stillness. The shadows of the cupboard seemed to stretch toward me. Swallowed, the tap became a rhythm, soft, patient, deliberate. I dared a glance over my shoulder, nothing, just the dim kitchen, the pale light falling across the counter. But then, a fogged shape appeared on the window. Not outside, inside. A breath, slow and shallow, misting the glass from the other side. I stepped back. It faded. I thought it had been a trick of the cold, but then it returned, closer this time. It lingered near the handle, rising and falling with invisible chest. I couldn't hear it breathe, but the air seemed to tighten. I tried to blink it away. The tapping started again. In the corner of the room, a cup rattled. I didn't move. The window trembled, not from wind, from pressure. I reached for the handle, telling myself I was imagining things. My fingers barely brushed it before the tap stopped. Silence. A heaviness pressed on my shoulders. I could feel it watching, patient, waiting. Then a soft scrape along the floorboards. Slow, intentional. I froze. Every instinct screamed to run. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and something else. Metallic, coppery, almost like old blood. I whispered a name. No one answered. I moved toward the living room, my steps tentative, careful. The fog on the window thickened. And then a handprint, pale, wet, pressed against the glass. I pressed my own hand to it. It was colder than ice, more solid than mist. A soft hum began almost under my skin, vibrating through my chest. I stepped back. The handprint was gone. Only fog remained, curling in uneven swirls. A curtain shifted. I thought the wind had moved it. But the windows were closed, and then I saw it. A shape, pale and thin, leaning just beyond the glass. Not fully visible. Just enough for the mind to fill in the rest. I wanted to scream. I couldn't. It tilted its head. The tapping started again, slow. Beneath the hum, I inched closer. Compelled, the shape pressed a face to the glass. No features, just a pale blur. My reflection merged with it for a second. I realized it wasn't outside. It had been behind me the whole time. I spun. Nothing. Only the kitchen, empty and dim. The fog on the window began to recede. I exhaled. Relief. But my breath lingered, heavy and wet against the glass. And there it was again. Another handprint, this time faint. Just at the corner, I reached to wipe it. It didn't smear. It stayed, cold, waiting. I stepped back, my fingers trembling. The tapping stopped. Silence. But the weight remained. Eyes, unseen, pressing in from the darkness. The fog on the window shifted. Curling like smoke, I whispered to myself. Nothing answered. The kitchen felt smaller. The room held its breath. I could hear my own, sharp and uneven. And then, nothing moved, only the window, pale and cold, with one last handprint lingering in the corner. I didn't touch it. I just watched, until the fog faded completely, and the night outside swallowed every trace. But even now, I feel it, watching, always. The attic smelled of dust and old wood. A pale light slipped through the cracked window, casting thin, trembling shadows across the floorboards. I hadn't been up here in years. The silence was deep, so complete it pressed against my ears. Every creak of the house felt magnified. Then I saw it. A chest, tucked into a corner I couldn't remember ever noticing. Its wood was dark, almost wet in the dim light. The metal bands along its edges seemed to hum. Softly, almost like breathing, I stepped closer. The air around it was different. Thicker, warmer, alive. I could feel it brushing against my skin, crawling beneath my clothes. My fingers itched to touch it. But I stopped. Some part of me whispered that the chest didn't want to be opened, and yet another part, a quieter, trembling part, wanted everything inside. I knelt beside it. The hum grew stronger, like a faint heartbeat beneath the floor. I pressed my palm to the lid. The vibration seeped into my bones. A shiver ran through me. I tried to listen. Not with my ears, but with something smaller, sharper, something in the pit of my chest. It was whispering, in a language I couldn't name. Just fragments. Words I almost understood. Lonely. Wait. Cold. The chest shifted under my hands. I froze. The room grew colder, though the window was closed. A shadow moved across the far wall, though nothing else stirred. I wanted to step back, and I did. But the hum followed me, curling around my ankles. Soft footsteps, my own. Or something else, echoed in the corners. I circled the chest slowly. Every angle looked the same. The lid barely raised a finger when I touched it again, quivering as if it were breathing. A smell rose. Old paper, something rotten beneath it, like forgotten dreams decaying in the dark. It made my stomach twist. Yet I couldn't leave. I pressed my ear against the wood. Inside it was quiet. And then a sigh, almost human soft, lost in the walls. The air trembled. And for a moment I thought I saw shapes shifting beneath the surface of the chest. Fingers, shadows of them, or memories of hands reaching. They recoiled the instant I blinked. I drew back, my breath sharp in my throat. But curiosity wouldn't let me go. I knelt again, my hands hovering above the lid. The hum pulsed in time with my heartbeat. I wanted to open it. I wanted to see, but I didn't. It was as if the chest was waiting, holding something back. Holding me back, too. The room was alive now. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of the curtains felt connected to it. A presence, faint and cold, brushing against the edges of my mind. Soft, patient, watching, I thought I heard whispers. Not from the chest, not quite, but from the empty corners. The attic itself seemed to breathe, sighing through the floorboards and beams. I felt small, fragile, like a moth caught in a web too fine to see. I rested my forehead against the lid. The hum sank into me, gentle, insistent. It promised secrets. It promised memories. It promised me. I tried to pull away, but my hands stayed. The chest was warm now, pulsing like it had a heartbeat of its own. Something stirred inside. Something aware. Something patient. I sat back finally and just watched it. The shadows of the room stretched longer, touching the edges of the chest. The light from the window seemed paler, thinner. I whispered my own name. The chest didn't answer. It only hummed, and then I realized maybe it never would. Maybe it didn't need to. Maybe the chest wasn't meant to open. Maybe I was meant to sit quietly, feeling it breathe beside me. I left the attic, closing the door softly behind me. The hum followed, faint but alive, curling beneath the floorboards. I didn't look back, and yet I could still feel it, waiting, breathing, alone in the corner, in the pale light that never quite touches it. It waits. The air was heavy with frost, though it wasn't quite winter yet. I had been sitting on the porch, listening to the trees whisper. The moon hung low, thin and pale, spilling a silver haze across the ground. That's when I noticed it. A faint glimmer behind the cabin. A trail, subtle at first, like light spilling through cracks. Curiosity tugged me forward. I stepped off the porch, the frost crunching under my boots. Each step felt measured, small, careful. The trail didn't run straight. It curved, weaving between oaks and birches whose branches scraped the sky. The glow pulsed, soft, almost like a heartbeat. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but when I paused, the only sound was the wind brushing the leaves. I told myself it was nothing. Trees settle, shadows shift, the path narrowed. Roots rose like ribs from the earth, and I had to step lightly over and around them. Moonlight caught the frost in a way that made the ground sparkle. There was a smell, a faint copper tang, old like buried metal. It made the hairs on my neck rise. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to retreat to the warmth of the cabin. But something in me moved forward, quietly insistent. The trees opened suddenly. I stepped into a clearing I did not know. The moon was higher here, brighter, but the air felt colder. The glow wasn't gone. It had pooled here, spreading across the ground like spilled liquid. It shimmered, restless, as if it had a life of its own. I knelt, trying to understand. The light seemed to move when I did, skimming over small stones and moss. Shadows pooled at the edges of the clearing, deep and waiting. A rustle. Something shifted behind the far tree line. I blinked. No one there. Just leaves and a quiet hush. The air grew heavier. My chest felt tight. Each breath drew in the scent of wet earth, decaying leaves, and something else. Something faintly sweet. I walked further into the clearing. The glow clung to the grass, thin but steady. My boots pressed into damp soil, leaving prints that vanished almost instantly. A pale light shimmered against a rock. I leaned closer. It looked like frost, crystallized, but it glowed from within. I reached out. The air around my fingers went still. The glow flickered. Small shadows dancing across my hand. Then I heard it. A soft hum, low and distant, like a lullaby sung underwater. I froze, tried to listen, tried to remember the sounds of the forest I knew. The hum stopped. Silence returned. Only the faint shimmer on the ground like the trail was breathing. I circled the clearing slowly. There were no footprints, no signs anyone had been here, only the path that led me, as if it had been waiting. I caught movement in my peripheral vision. A shadow flitted between trees, pale and quick. When I turned, nothing. Just the cold, the light, and the hush. I wanted to call out. I wanted the sound of my voice to chase the unease away, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth was dry. The ground beneath me trembled. Softly at first, then in little pulses like the clearing itself was breathing. The glow shifted, stretching along the moss, forming shapes I could almost recognize. I stepped back. The light didn't chase me, didn't fade. It just lingered, patient, watching. I felt my pulse in my ears, loud and insistent. Soft footsteps, or was it mine? Echoed in the clearing, though no one approached. The hum returned, this time lighter, like wind across glass. I turned toward the trail again. It beckoned, quiet and insistent. But I could see now it didn't lead anywhere I knew. Something stirred at the edge of the trees. A figure, tall and pale, dissolving when I blinked. Or maybe it had never been there at all. I left the clearing slowly, each step hesitant, careful not to disturb the hush. The trail behind the cabin faded as I approached the porch. It was just moonlight now, spilling over frost and bark. Inside, the cabin felt warmer, safe. Yet the memory of the clearing lingered, soft and persistent. I knew the trail had not vanished. It waits, patient, quiet. I keep the door closed, the curtains drawn. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I see a pale glow on the edge of the woods, and I hear the softest footsteps behind the trees. The cabin was quieter than it had any right to be. Even the trees outside seemed to be holding their breath. I had lit a single lamp, but its glow wavered, hesitant. The first flicker caught me mid-breath. Light stuttered across the walls. Shadows bent in angles they shouldn't have. I thought it was the wind at first. A branch tapping, scraping. But the flickers didn't follow a rhythm. They were chaotic. Alive. A shape appeared in the corner of the room. Just a shadow, pale and too still. I blinked. It vanished. My hands trembled on the table. I told myself it was nothing. Cabin, old wiring, nerves fraying, yet the unease nestled deeper into my chest. The lamp flickered again. And this time I saw more. Another figure, or maybe the same, closer now. The edges weren't solid like smoke trying to hold form. I froze. The air felt thicker. Each breath I drew sounded too loud. Soft footsteps, or maybe echoes of them, crept across the floorboards. I couldn't move. Couldn't even blink fast enough. The room was no longer just shadows and walls. It was shifting. A cupboard door swung open, slowly, and then shut, just as quickly. I swore I saw a hand vanish inside. My heartbeat thudded like a drum, too fast to ignore. But the cabin didn't answer it. Only flickers. I edged toward the window. Outside, the night hung thick, black, and still. The trees whispered. I imagined shapes moving in the fog. Inside, the lamp danced again. Figures appeared, then dissolved. One lingered just long enough for me to notice a tilt of the head. A silence pressed against my ears. I whispered to myself just in case. No reply. Only the flickering, the faintest rustle in the corner. My eyes darted. Nothing. I turned, careful not to breathe too loudly. The shadows in the hallway were wrong. They bent where the light didn't touch. and I thought I saw eyes, pale, unblinking, watching me. The lamp hiccuped and went out. Dark swallowed the room in one quiet gulp. My own pulse roared in the emptiness. Then, the flicker returned. It was brighter now, too bright. Figures moved in a slow, impossible rhythm. One reached toward me, just the barest hint of form. I stumbled backward. The floor beneath my feet seemed to breathe. The walls throbbed with pale light. The room was alive, and I was intruding. I closed my eyes, prayed, if only to ground myself. When I opened them, the room was calm, the lamp steady. But the air was wrong, heavy, watching. Every surface seemed to hum softly, like it remembered my fear. I crept toward the door, saw footsteps behind me, though no one moved. I told myself it was my imagination, but the memory of those fleeting shapes lingered, thin and sharp. Outside, fog rolled closer. Inside, I could still see them in the corners of my eyes. Flickers, flickers, always flickers. Too quick to understand, I sank to the floor. The cabin held its silence. Even my breath felt borrowed, and I realized something terrible. They weren't leaving. They couldn't leave. The cabin was alive with their absence, and I was the intruder. A last flicker, not from the lamp. From the corner of the room I hadn't dared to look at. The shadow leaned just slightly into me, and then it was gone. Only the lamp hummed softly. Only the fog pressed against the windows. And only the memory of shapes that should not have existed lingered. Like soft footsteps walking just behind my ribs. The fog clung to the trees, thick and wet, as if the night itself were breathing. The wind moved through the branches with a scraping sound, sharp and metallic, like steel against stone. I paused on the path, feeling it curl around me, curling my thoughts too. The whispers began then. Soft, insistent, not words I could catch, but tones that nudged my mind, prying at memories I hadn't named. I thought I was alone, but the way the wind curved around the corners, around the trunks, suggested otherwise. It wasn't playful, not wind, not entirely. The metal scent of rain-soaked leaves filled my nose, and in it the whispers became clearer, fragments I almost recognized. My name, faint, carried in echoes I shouldn't hear. I tried to tell myself it was memory, imagination, or the wet night playing tricks. A street lamp flickered far ahead. Its light trembled, pale and unstable, throwing shadows that moved in ways shadows shouldn't. One lingered at the edge of my vision, tall, thin, scraping against the bark. I stopped. The hum of the wind and whispers grew louder, denser, pressing against my skin like the night itself wanted to speak through me. I could almost piece the sounds into language, metallic syllables twisting, forming intent. A rustling came from the underbrush. Not leaves, not small animals. Something deliberate, measured, like soft footsteps pacing just beyond the fog. I took a breath, and it carried cold iron, a taste of old machines and rain-damp earth. The whispers wove tighter around my head. It was as though the forest itself had teeth, grinding words I should never have known. A shape emerged, brief, between the trees. Not solid, not fully formed, just angles and glints of steel-like surfaces catching the dim light. It moved with the wind, and yet against it, deliberate, sliding closer without sound. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Every hair on my arms lifted as if anticipating a touch that would leave marks on my bones. The whispers became urgent, not loud but closer, intimate, pressing against my eardrums like icy metal. I thought I could understand them. Not words, but meaning. I felt the intentions behind them, patient, slow, waiting. The fog shifted again, rolling like a tide over the ground. It revealed more shapes, thin, long, faceless. I counted 3, then 4. Then I stopped counting. Everything moved in silence for a moment. No wind, no whispers. Just my own breath, too loud in my ears, too human. I felt the shapes lean closer in that silence, curious, patient. A single droplet of water fell from a leaf. Plink. It echoed like a bell in the stillness. Then another, and another. The pattern felt deliberate, almost conversational. I took a step backward, my foot sinking into wet leaves. The whispers returned, layered, weaving around the sound of my movement. Each tone carved into my mind, leaving impressions I couldn't name. Something brushed past me. cold, metallic, not sharp, but heavy, deliberate. It left a memory on my skin of places I'd never been, of fear I hadn't known. The lamp ahead flickered once more, and I noticed the shadows were no longer alone. They shifted, mirrored, multiplied, thin angles slicing the fog, merging, retreating. I realized then the wind carried not just sound, but presence. I tried to run, but the path seemed to stretch, extending into gray nothingness. The whispers were everywhere now, circling my thoughts, pressing metal against the soft places inside me. I felt my name again, closer, a whisper, a scrape, a sigh. Intimate, familiar, impossible to ignore. And then the forest fell into near-perfect silence. Even the fog seemed still. I could feel the shapes lingering, waiting, patient. I walked on slowly, the whispers fading but leaving residue, tiny scratches of thought and memory I couldn't shake. The path curved. The lamp flickered one last time. Somewhere in the mist, the metallic whispers sighed, and I realized I had never truly left the sound behind. The fog had rolled in thick that evening. It swallowed the streetlights, leaving everything pale and hollow. I walked slowly, the soles of my shoes pressing wet against the pavement. I first noticed the shapes at the corner of my vision. Pale, wavering, almost like smoke, but heavier. I stopped. My breath formed small clouds in front of me. They didn't move like people. Not exactly, just drifted, bending with the wind. I tried to blink them away, convince myself it was nothing. But then one shifted sharply and I froze. It mirrored me. Every hesitant step I took, it mirrored. Every pause, every tilt of my head. It was always there, just beyond the fog, just beyond touch. I whispered to myself, soft and trembling, "You're imagining this." But the fog pulsed around it, almost breathing. The shapes multiplied slowly. Not in number, but in detail. I could make out long limbs, thin necks, the suggestion of faces that never fully formed. I felt my pulse tighten in my chest, a fascination I couldn't shake. I wanted to see them closer. The street lamp flickered once, twice. The fog swallowed the light each time, and when it came back, the shapes were nearer. I realized then they didn't approach me. They only reflected me. They moved in my shadow, not against it. A soft hum filled the quiet. Not from anything I could see. It vibrated in my chest, slow, steady. I lifted a hand. It lifted too. Not quite the same, but enough. It was a shadow of me, stitched from mist. I tried to walk faster. They followed, gliding, always just behind, always just beyond. I felt like I was leading a dance with my own echo. The fog thickened and I stumbled. A hand, or something like one, brushed against my arm. Cold, soft, and wet like dew on skin. I jerked away, heart hammering, but no one was there. Only fog. Only shapes that paused when I paused. I crouched near a curb. The fog curled around me like smoke in a glass jar. I could see the outlines clearer now. Thin bodies, featureless faces, bending, waiting, a slow rustle like fabric brushing stone whispered past. I dared to look up. One shape leaned closer. It had no eyes, but I felt it watching. The fascination turned to dread. I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted to the wet asphalt. A sudden silence fell, heavier than the fog. Even the hum had vanished. The shapes froze, suspended like ice in midair. I exhaled, and my breath seemed deafening. The figures mirrored me, frozen with me. A soft, wet fog seeped into my hair, my sleeves, my lungs. I moved a hand again. It mirrored. A slow, deliberate imitation that made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. Only whispers could escape me, and the fog drank them. Minutes passed, or hours. Time lost meaning in the dense gray. One shape detached. It drifted toward a broken street sign, paused, then vanished into the mist. I watched it go, and I realized the others were watching me, still just out of reach. I tried to step forward. My legs obeyed, slowly, cautiously. The shapes mirrored, but never closed the distance. A pale light appeared ahead, faint, shaky, like a heartbeat in the fog. I wanted to move toward it. The shapes stayed, dissolved, or maybe retreated. The street smelled of wet asphalt and decay. The fog swirled, hiding everything beyond the light, and in that moment I felt entirely alone. But the shapes were still there, lingering at the edge of sight. Not attacking, not leaving, just waiting, always just beyond. I walked on, each step soft and deliberate. The hum returned, quieter now, almost like a lullaby. The fog shifted around me, curling at my ankles, brushing my face, and I knew I could never outrun them. They were part of the fog now, part of the quiet. I didn't look back. But sometimes, in the corner of my vision, I still see them. Drifting, pale and slow, always just out of reach. And I wonder, if I stop, will they stop too? The cabin smelled of damp wood and something older, something that hadn't been disturbed for years. Outside, the fog rolled low, curling around the trees like fingers. I had come here for quiet, for solitude. But quiet has a way of twisting when you're alone. The door shut behind me with a hollow click. Immediately, the floorboards groaned beneath my weight. I told myself it was normal. Old houses settle, but then I noticed the steps. Soft, slow, following. I paused. 1 step, 2 steps. They were mine. Or so I thought. I tried to ignore them. I busied myself with the fireplace, raking cold ash into neat lines. But the steps persisted, always behind me, echoing, matching the rhythm of my pulse. The wind scraped against the window panes. It sounded almost like whispering, words I couldn't quite catch. I pressed my ear closer. Nothing. Silence. I moved toward the kitchen, each step deliberate, careful. Something in the corner caught my eye, a shadow that trembled just beyond the pale light. I blinked. It was gone. The shadow, the steps, the hum in the walls, they all wanted something from me. A floorboard creaked sharply to the left. I froze, holding my breath. It had been empty a moment ago. Now, there was a weight in the room. I tried to reason. Maybe a raccoon, maybe whined through the old chimney. But when I turned, the air itself seemed to shift, heavy and expectant. The steps came again, closer, softer this time, as if hesitant. I felt them behind the door. They paused when I paused, a slow, deliberate dance of imitation. My chest tightened. My hands shook, though I tried to steady them. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening, waiting. The floor hummed beneath the quiet. Soft footsteps shuffled across the floor like a second heartbeat. I whispered to myself, trying to anchor reality. There's no one here. You're alone. Yet each step was a reminder that alone doesn't always mean safe. I crept to the window, fog pressing against the glass. Trees swayed as if nodding to some rhythm I couldn't hear. And then I saw it, faint, fleeting, a figure in the mist. Just a shape, pale, indistinct. Gone before I could focus. I shut the curtains quickly. The room returned to dim candlelight, flickering over walls scarred with age. And still the steps moved, around the corners, across the floor. Behind me, I tried to speak. My voice cracked in the thick air. Who's there? No answer. Only the echo of my own words, swallowed by the walls. I remembered the old journal I'd found on the counter. Its pages brittle, filled with scrawled confessions of someone who'd waited too long. Their fear seeped into mine. I realized this cabin keeps those who come too close. A hum started low, vibrating under the floorboards. It made my teeth chatter. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees close, hoping the sound would fade. The steps slowed, then stopped. Silence stretched thin, taut across the room. Then a single step, directly behind me. I didn't move. My heart felt like it might stop entirely. A shadow shifted along the wall, pale and liminal. The candle flickered. I wanted to look, to confront it, but my body refused, caught in the stillness of waiting. Time lost shape. Minutes or hours, I couldn't tell. Then, almost imperceptibly, the steps receded. Not gone, not absent, just retreating into corners I couldn't see. The fog pressed harder against the windows now, seeping into the room as if trying to remind me of the outside world. I lay back against the floor, letting the cold seep into my bones, listening, waiting. The floor hummed softly, echoing a rhythm I was still part of. I told myself I would leave at first light, but something whispered in the hum, soft as breath, not a threat. Not words, just the tension. I realize the cabin doesn't want me gone. I closed my eyes. The steps may return. They may wait for me until I can no longer tell my own from theirs. Yet for now there is stillness, a quiet that hums beneath my skin, curling around my thoughts, reminding me I am never truly alone. And I don't move. The wind pressed cold against the panes. Fingers of fog curled along the garden path. I could see the outline of the old house, silent, almost waiting. Inside, the kitchen clock ticked unevenly. A shadow lingered beneath the doorway, and I felt it before I saw it. Soft, patient, watching. I had thought it gone last night. The window was bare then, or so I believed. But now, the pale eyes returned, glimmering in the dim light. I froze. The hum of the refrigerator sounded impossibly loud. My own breath, shallow and deliberate, echoed against the walls. The window shook as the wind sighed. I thought I saw the reflection of someone standing behind me, but when I turned, only the dark hallway stared back. There it was again. The eyes. Closer this time. I dared not breathe, fearing it would vanish, or worse, step inside. I stepped back, careful, my shoes whispering against the floorboards. A candle trembled, spilling a soft glow that barely reached the corners. In that glow, I could see the faint outline of movement behind the glass. The fog pressed against the window pane, and the eyes, pale and unblinking, followed. I could almost hear the soft, deliberate rhythm of someone or something breathing outside. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, or a reflection from the street lamp. But the eyes didn't waver, didn't flicker. I sank to the floor, my back against the cold wall. The faint rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps, growing closer, yet never quite reaching the door. I didn't dare reach for my phone. It was too quiet to risk the static glow of a screen. Even the tick of the kitchen clock seemed muffled, distant. A shiver ran down my spine as I imagined the face pressed closer to the glass. Its features blurred, shifting, like the fog outside twisting against itself. The candle guttered. I thought I saw a finger, pale and thin, trace a circle against the window. Then it vanished, leaving only the cold reflection of the room behind me. I pressed my hand to the pane, feeling nothing but glass and chill. Yet the eyes lingered, frozen, unwavering. The wind shifted, carrying a whisper that I almost thought I understood. It could have been the trees. Or it could have been it, speaking without words. A floorboard groaned somewhere upstairs. Or was it under the stairs? I didn't move. I didn't dare. The shadows in the room deepened. Every object seemed to lean toward the window, as if straining to glimpse what I feared most. I wanted to call out, to shatter the stillness with any sound, but my voice had gone, swallowed by the night. A flicker of movement caught my eye. The curtain shifted barely, like a sigh, and the eyes, impossibly pale, had stepped closer. I held my breath, willing myself to vanish into the wall. The faintest hum lingered, a vibration in the floorboards that I couldn't place. The wind outside carried the smell of damp earth, of decay. I thought I saw the shadow of a hand pressed flat against the glass, and then it was gone, leaving only the faintest imprint in my mind. I dared not look away. Every blink felt like a betrayal, every pause a step closer to something unseen. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into silence, and silence stretched into a weight that pressed on my chest. The candle finally died. Darkness pooled around the edges of the room, soft, patient, almost alive. I leaned closer to the window, but the eyes had vanished. Or perhaps they were only waiting. I moved back, the chill of the glass lingering on my fingertips. And though the house was empty, I could feel the gaze following, patient, eternal, just beyond the veil of the night. I slept with the curtains drawn. Yet when the moon rose, I thought I saw them again, peering, and I realized some things never leave. The fog clung to the trees like a memory I couldn't shake. Dawn had touched the sky, pale and soft, but the forest stayed muffled, quiet, uneasy. I walked slowly, my boots sinking into damp earth. Every step felt heavier than the last. I kept thinking I'd hear a branch snap behind me, but the silence swallowed even that. The hum came first as a vibration beneath my feet. Low, constant, almost like the earth itself was breathing. I froze, heart stuttering. Nothing moved in the fog. Nothing should have moved. I remembered the eyes from last night, the way they had followed me through shadows that weren't there. I wanted to tell myself it was just imagination, but the air felt thick with something unseen, patient, watching. A thin shaft of light broke through the mist. I followed it instinctively, my hands brushing against wet leaves. Shapes appeared and vanished, branches, rocks, roots. But there was something else moving between them, faster than the eye could catch, a flicker of shadow, pale, shifting. The hum grew louder, almost unbearable. It wasn't the wind, not the forest. It was beneath me, rising through the soles of my boots, curling around my spine like a cold finger. I stopped near a clearing, fog swirling low. The ground was smooth here, almost unnaturally so. I leaned down, brushing away the dew, and my fingers sank into soft soil. But it wasn't just earth. It felt like skin, pulsing under my touch. A rustle drew my eyes upward. I didn't see it at first, just movement, a flicker of gray among the trees. And then the shape came fully into focus, tall, impossibly still, standing between two ancient oaks, watching. I blinked. It vanished. The fog had swallowed it again. I wanted to call out. My voice caught in my throat. The forest hummed around me, patient, endless. I tried to keep moving, step by careful step through the mist. But the clearing seemed to stretch on, never ending, always just out of reach. Every shadow I passed, I felt it following me, mimicking my pace, breathing softly in rhythm with mine. The hum shifted, like a note bending, almost forming a word, or maybe a name I knew once. My ears strained. I heard nothing clear, just the fog moving, whispering against my skin. A faint light flickered at the edge of the clearing. I approached it slowly, almost afraid to draw closer. It was small, pale, hovering just above the ground. Not fire, not electricity. Something older, almost alive. When I reached it, the light pulsed, and in the pulse I thought I saw faces. Thin, pale faces pressed against some invisible surface, watching, silent, waiting. I stepped back. The light shrank, swallowed by the fog, leaving only emptiness. I thought I could hear footsteps then. Soft, deliberate, brushing against the undergrowth. Not my own, not human. I turned. Nothing. Just trees, swaying gently, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I stumbled, heart hammering, and the fog thickened, curling around me like smoke. The hum beneath the ground intensified. I pressed my hands to my ears. Still it found me. A vibration through bone, through air, through thought. I leaned against a tree, pale light washing over the bark. I tried to catch my breath, telling myself it would pass. But the feeling of being watched lingered, like a shadow inside my own shadow, like eyes pressed against the back of my mind. Time became meaningless. Moments stretched into each other. I didn't know if I had been walking for minutes or hours. Only the hum remained constant, beneath me, around me, alive in its quiet, terrible patience. Eventually, I stopped fighting the fog. I let it curl around me. I let the hum settle into my chest, a slow rhythm that seemed older than the world. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't lost. I was already here. The fog thinned slightly as the sun climbed higher. Birds called somewhere distant, but the clearing remained silent. And I felt that whatever had followed me last night, whatever had watched from the shadows, had not gone anywhere. I stepped forward again carefully, and the forest breathed around me, waiting, patient. The hum beneath the earth never stopped, and I knew I would hear it again, tomorrow or the next day, and perhaps I was meant to. The cabin stands silent now. The forest presses close around it, dark and still. Branches scrape softly against the walls like fingernails brushing over old wood. I sit near the window, the pale light fading, a thin sliver of sun dissolving into the gray. The air smells faintly of damp earth and something older, unplaceable. I thought I wanted this. Alone. Finally. But solitude is different when you are certain you are not the only one. Memories drift like smoke in the corners of my mind. The old laughter, soft footsteps that never seemed to belong to me. Shadows bending just beyond the firelight. I tell myself it's just the wind. I tell myself the cabin is settling, groaning with age. But every night it feels more deliberate. The chair creaks behind me, a shift too measured to be casual. I do not turn. I can feel it, watching. Not from the window, not from the doorway, but from everywhere all at once. Cold patience. The hum of the stove is steady, but beneath it a quieter vibration runs through the floorboards, a pulse that matches my own, slow, persistent. Outside, the fog curls around the trees. It hides everything and yet reveals the shapes of things better left unseen. I watch it, half hoping it will swallow the cabin whole. A memory flits. Me, laughing with friends years ago, voices bright and distant. The echo lingers. I lean back, the chair scraping lightly, and the sound feels magnified, like a confession. The walls are bare, yet they breathe. Something leans just slightly over the threshold of vision, then vanishes when I blink. I tell myself I am tired. The fog blurs at the edges of the windows like smoke curling toward me. I move to the kitchen. Water drips from a leaky pipe, a quiet, uneven rhythm. I taste it, cold, still. But even as I swallow, I feel it. Eyes in the dark, waiting. The fire flickers. Shadows twist and stretch unnaturally. I do not flinch, do not move, though every muscle hums with awareness. A sudden silence falls. Even the hum of the stove seems distant now. The fog outside thickens, rolling closer, wrapping the cabin in white. I hear the faintest whisper. Not words, not quite. A suggestion of sound, like a thought brushing against the ear. I sit, breath steady, the chair beneath me firm. The floor solid, and yet I cannot shake the sense of presence. I stare at the corner of the room where shadows gather. They do not disperse. They linger. A pale, impossible patience that mirrors my own. I am alone, and yet the cabin feels less empty than it should. A quiet pressure behind the ribs. A hush pressing down from the ceiling. I move slowly to the window. Fog blurs the forest into something unrecognizable, a dream stretched thin. The trees sway, but the motion seems deliberate, like they know where I am looking. The air smells faintly of smoke and wet pine. Cold fingers brush my neck as I watch the fog. I shiver, not from the chill, but from acknowledgement. I reach for the stove, warm my hands on the edge of its iron. The hum returns, steady, constant. It fills the room, pushes back the fog just enough to see my own reflection in the glass. My face looks tired, older, and yet I recognize the acceptance in my eyes. I have always wanted to be here, and I am. The shadows linger in corners. They fold into the edges of the room. I do not run. I do not call out. I breathe. A faint rustle, like paper shifting or soft footsteps brushing against carpet. I turn slowly and nothing is there. Only the hum, the drip, the quiet press of fog against the cabin walls. I sit again by the window. The fog moves, curling and stretching. It whispers secrets I will never fully hear. I am alone, and yet I feel watched. Not fear, not exactly. Just acknowledgement. The sun finally dies behind the trees. The cabin darkens. The hum of the stove continues, a heartbeat in the quiet. Shadows stretch into the corners. I close my eyes and let the fog, the quiet, the presence that waits just beyond sight fold around me. I am here, and they are too. The forest exhales. The cabin breathes. And I sit, finally still. The night stretches, endless and soft, as if it will remember my silence long after I have gone.